Hey everyone, my name is Rooster, and welcome back to Mechabellum. Finally, I have managed to get some really good games on the new season, and I will be posting multiple videos across the next couple of days, starting with this one against I Like Napping. Now, this will feature one of the new techs, specifically the one on Rhino, at the very end. But it starts like this, with Giant Spec being picked up for napping, with Void Eyes and Sledgehammers. And as for myself, well, I decided to go for a Fire Badger Void Eye pack. They have been nerfed on the new season. Void Eyes lost a tiny bit of attack interval, and Fire Badger Napalm got nerfed. But still, I would say that both of these units are very powerful, and I have been playing and encountering them on regular occasions with success in the new season. So don't be too afraid if you saw those nerfs. It still is very, very powerful to go for something like Napalm, and especially Void Eyes can overwhelm in the mid to late game if you decide to properly invest into them. So here, round one, we have Giant Spec. I'm a marksman spec, which means that next round I'll get access to that orange man, and I don't have to worry too much about my anti-air. On round one here, I'd be looking to grab some chaff, because that's the one thing I don't have, and the same thing is true for my opponent, who goes for double crawler. I decided to attack the right side. I wasn't really too interested in trying to go through the wall and the rapid fire cannon. You could. It is rather likely that my opponent will stack on the right side, so if I want to play a crossfire, I could try my hand at that. I could put a Void Eye on the very front and just tank that rapid fire cannon and punch through. But I didn't really want to play a crossfire, and I'm perfectly happy pushing into the empty side of the field, so that's what we do. Now, I do make a slight mistake here. I should sell my middle building. There's no reason for it to be there. If my opponent pushes left side, I have the wall and the small cannon to defend, but this mid turret will likely not be doing anything. So ever so slight mistake there. My opponent doesn't sell either though, but you know, he's the one defending, so typically it's somewhat wise to try and keep your buildings when you decide to defend. They can be useful. And let's see how this goes. Round one here, Badgers, they kind of need techs to become useful, and the Sledgehammers are generally a bit stronger early on, so you will see that on round one here, the Sledgehammers prevail, and the Void Eyes of Napping are able to do a whole lot more than mine. So we lose round one, sadly, and that brings us to round number two. We get our Marksman. This is our power spike, so ideally we do manage to win. The cards are nothing impressive. My opponent is a Giant Spec. You know, maybe you want to go for something like Assault Raiden. An improved Steel Ball could be fun with the new tech, but it's just not very good into Sledgehammers and Void Eyes, and Assault Raiden into Giant Spec will just get melted, so it's better to skip. My opponent does the same thing, and, well, at this point, I guess I have my anti-air, so I don't have to be too worried, and I can just go for something like Void Eye suppression shots to try and get a bit of an edge over the opponent's eyes and the Sledgehammers. I would say that aside from that, I'm just looking to grab some chaff, maybe put some chaff in the middle here so that the Chungus doesn't end up killing, you know, too many of my important units, and maybe some late chaff here or there could help. A Fang beside the tower is not a bad idea either, although it is very safe. It would be somewhat unlikely for my opponent to already start pushing my empty side of the board. And instead he decides to go for a Wraith on round number two. Pretty ballsy, considering I do have that Marksman, and it's lined up in, you know, such a way that it should be able to get rid of that pretty quickly. Now, I decided to buy Chaff, and I also buy a Wasp. This serves two purposes. One, my opponent didn't have anti-air, and I didn't expect him to go for Wraith, to be perfectly honest. And two, it's just a good late unit to arrive that also protects against most flank threats. So I was pretty happy to get it here. I didn't think he would go Wraith, so, you know, building the Wasp would kind of force Napping to buy a Wasp counter next round if he doesn't want to lose, and it makes it a bit easier to predict what my opponent is doing. Now, he goes for Wraith anyway, but I have a Marksman on the field, and Wraith has a new tech as well, which we might just see, which is that Roomba tech, the ground Wraith. And the thing about it is that while it is powerful, it does remove the ability of the Wraith to be able to shoot air. And Wraith is one of those units that is very useful at dealing with something like Wasp. So even though it looks like the Wasp might be, you know, a bit of a bad purchase here, it's still going to defend my flank. And if my opponent ever is forced to click a ground Wraith, because of a threat of something like, AA marksman, then the wasp will kind of unlock itself and become useful again as a, potential even DPS threat. Round number 3, we get unit reinforcements. I decided to pick up the Sabertooth because I was kind of preparing to force my opponents to get into that land cruiser tech. And then once it's on the ground, the Sabers are not a bad response at all to try and get rid of it. So that's what I decided to go for. Now, I tried to position one of the Sabers in such a way that it would take out the big building in the middle, but my opponent sells it, and now it looks kind of silly. I wanted to buy another Badger, because I was a bit afraid of this midsection with the amount of chaff and the Void Eyes, and the Sabertooth might just get stuck. But I didn't have the money here to buy everything I wanted, which was to buy another Marksman, go for AA, and also buy a little bit more chaff to prevent, any missiles. I was a bit afraid that my opponent might try to missile here on the side. And so, yeah, I am going to not buy any chaff, and that's not what you want to see. Fangs in the front, exactly what, I was a bit worried about, because I don't have that much chaff clear. So next round already, I know I need to get more Badgers, and I probably need to get range as well, because at 6 pieces of chaff on round 3, I can't ignore that anymore. Opponent picks up the Phoenixes, which is not a bad pick, but it does kind of run into the AA here, and yeah, look at that, right? That Wraith immediately gets locked on, and this will likely force my opponent to click Land Cruiser, and therefore make sure that my Wasps have a ton of value, and potentially kind of force him to buy something like Mustang. The AA is also simply useful in this case against the Phoenixes, although it looks like we will be losing here. I think partially because of that midsection and having no range on my Badger. I just can't really get through, and there's too much stuff here on the field for my Marksman to be able to do its job, so we lose a bit more hit points, and we're already down to 3k. Now 3k is a fine hit point total to be on, but I would like to start winning a couple rounds here instead of dropping even further, and with the amount of spells here showing up, I might end up losing even more hit points. Now, I didn't really consider either of these spells. I rarely do on round 4. I feel like they're very expensive, and I like just playing for econ if I can. So I was not expecting Acid Blast. Even if I was, I'm not sure it's worth playing around. Now, my opponent positions this very aggressively, so I could have shielded part of it, but I mean, am I really going to put down, 2 shields here? If I lose them, then I'm just even further behind in money, so I don't really think that's the right play, but it is going to hurt, I can tell you that much. I go for the Badger play. I sell my Saber in the middle because I realized, oh, my opponent doesn't really have a lot in terms of, units that are vulnerable to Saber, so let's just retrieve some of that cash. I go for the Rhino Assault because that was also something I had to worry about. Aside from, the Storm and the Acid, there was a Rhino drop, and well, I have a very empty back of the field, so we're going to be protecting that. Opponent doesn't go for it, as the Acid, of course, got picked up. And I go for a shallow flank here with the Badger and the Crawler to kind of distract and pull away my opponent's army, or pull it apart, rather, and perhaps try and create some openings. And here we go. Land Cruiser has been teched. So, Land Cruiser puts the Wraith on the ground, meaning that it no longer can get targeted by something like aerial specialization. It is no longer an air unit. Now, this does mean that it also no longer benefits from things like aerial specialist, so be aware of this. On top of that, it gains 50 range, more than range enhancement, but it does lose both its ability to hit air units, and it also increases its attack interval by 0.5 seconds. So it becomes a little bit worse of a chaff clear unit in a way, although it is still a Wraith, and it is going to be extremely safe because it can even buy range enhancement afterwards to have more range than something like a Vulcan, with the trait of the Wraith that it doesn't get stuck on anything. So yeah, pretty powerful. Also, I got absolutely slammed on round number 4, and now I'm down to 1700 hit points. That Acid really hurt. Now, a Missile Strike shows up on this round. Again, Electromagnetic Blast, by the way, potentially a bit scary. Although I don't have, well, I do have some text, but I guess my opponent didn't want to go for the expensive spell and instead try and get rid of my Wasp, which is still a potential, point of concern for him. He doesn't have a great way of killing them. And, well, I know that this might get targeted, so I decide to move it with a beacon, avoid that missile strike, keep the wasps alive, and now I go for a push on the left side. Main reason is the asset is still there. I don't think it's worth here going for hounds with sprinkler. It's going to use all my deployments. The hounds are useless, aside from clearing the acid, and next round, the acid is going to be gone, and that sprinkler tech is going to be there doing nothing. Instead, I need to make sure that my board becomes more powerful, and one way of doing that is just avoiding the acid and trying to make a play over here. So what I do is a crawler, a saber, a badger, and also a wasp here. I picked redeploy, so I could redeploy one of my sabers to the left side, and I put a missile interceptor on the line to try and deal with any missiles. One of them still lands, but crucially, the one that was on the line got intercepted, and that allows me to get in and get a debuff. And with that debuff, I can actually fight back, even though my units are still sitting inside of the acid. And you can see my wasps are starting to do an awful lot of work here. Now, I will still end up taking a little bit of damage, and my marksmen go down. But now I get to use the acid myself, take down that wraith before it takes the tower. Now it will fall. But I'll take that. For a round where, 60-70% of my army was still sitting in acid, I'm okay taking, 200 damage there. I think that's completely fine. Round number 6, Ion Blast shows up. We do have quite a few powerful spells, and I decide to go for it. My opponent does the same, and we are simply going to layer that on his strong side of the board. And my opponent decides to go for my weak side, where I decided to go for a new attack. Now, that's pretty ballsy, right? It's a big risk to take, because he knows that I'm going to have units over here. He doesn't know whether I'm going to commit further into units over there. I guess he does get a guaranteed missile interceptor device as, 100 value to kill, but I didn't really want to necessarily go ham on this left side. I'm okay strengthening it a little bit with a crawler and redeploying a marksman, but I don't necessarily need to, absolutely crush over there. So we're just going to add some chaff and redeploy a 100 cost unit, but not overcommit too much. You will see that I am also leveling my wasps, because I'm still realizing, like, hey, when is my opponent going to do anything about the wasps? I know they're easy to counter for Giant Spec, because they can just buy Fortress AA, but still, this is a serious threat. You will see that I also beacon my units here towards the right, as I try to avoid the ion beam, but it doesn't, show up on that left side, or on the right side rather. It shows up on the left, where it does manage to kill my Sabertooth, some wasps, and that's about going to be it. But the right side, we managed to do a lot of damage. And my Void Eyes are still alive, my Badgers and my Wasps are fighting back against that Wraith. And things are looking quite good. And at this point I'm thinking, am I going to go for something like Wasp Range at this stage? Like, is that something that I'm interested in? Because my opponent is really disrespecting it, and right now he doesn't have a great way of dealing with it. I might run into some trouble later on with the whole Fortress AA thing, but I don't really see a better way, and I have wasps on the board already, like, why not go for that? So that was kind of my next idea here, as I do take a little bit more damage on the Ion Blast round. And here we go, round number 7, as the Rhinos show up. Now I quickly pick them and think to myself, well, doesn't seem like that bad of an idea here. It pairs quite nicely with the Wasps, gives some front line. The opponent doesn't have the, highest of DPS. It's low-level Phoenixes, and Wraith isn't exactly known to take down large units. So why not just go for that? And immediately we go for the armor enhancement here, boosting the hit points by 50%. And we also buy a ton more Wasps, 2 more to be precise, as well as a level on our highest level Wasp, which I redeploy from the flank over here. That doesn't mean that I leave my flank open, but my opponent has no way of knowing that I'm going to make this play, so I can just leave the flank open here. It would be crazy for him to try something over there, because a level 3 Wasp basically kills anything if it tries to get spawned in. Napping also goes for the Rhino. It's a pretty common play whenever you have a unit drop to try and go for this armor Rhino. It's a very, very powerful tank, and you get a cheap tech like armor enhancement, which boosts HP by 50%, and there's a lot of boards that will struggle to deal with that. Now I decide to beacon in. There's not much in the way. I try to avoid the chaff as much as I can. And yeah, forge a path towards that tower, get the debuff. and hopefully start stabilizing a little bit, because napping is still at 4.5k hit points. Notice that I am winning on the left side. Wasps have pretty high base DPS. You might think that they're akin to Mustang, but they're really not. Mustang is more on the chaff clear side of things, whereas Wasps is really more of a DPS unit. And you can see it hurts. They definitely do. Wraiths are being taken down. The debuff was successful, and finally we get a round win with a significant amount of damage being dealt. And there we go. Round number 7, our first victory, sending napping down to below 3k. And if we can replicate that, we might be able to win in 2 rounds. Although, surely my opponent now will probably buy something like Fortress. That would make the most sense, considering Fortress is a pretty good DPS unit against things like Rhino. And obviously it has that AA tech available to deal with the Wasps. Photon coating available there. I decided to pick it up. The acid is back off cooldown, so you know, the photon coating should help with that as well if my opponent decides to layer it on the left. And here come the fortresses. My opponent is a giant spec, remember. He hadn't used his specialist yet, but now he will, unlocking that fortress for free and double teching it with launcher overload for that boost in DPS, and fortress AA, of course, against my wasp army. I don't really want to move my units here. I could, but I felt like it was alright to try and keep pushing in on this side. Perhaps my opponent would, you know, overcommit and think that I would put some stuff over here. So it's the classic kind of back and forth with aggro, trying to create some threats and then, you know, keeping your opponent guessing as to whether you're going to double down on the side or whether you're going to, you know, move units and attack elsewhere, especially when you have something like redeployment. Missile interceptor there to try and deal with any missiles that would slow down my Rhino. And I go for the new tech, Combat Evolvement. What does it do? It boosts the Rhino's HP and attack by 3% every second during battle. So let's say that I didn't have the defense enhancement here, and I only had armor enhancement. I currently have 50% bonus HP. And every second, that would turn into 53, 56, 59, 62% bonus HP. And so that can quickly ramp up. You can see here the numbers are starting to grow. So is the attack, of course. And we just chopped that fortress. And as we do, well, the Rhino isn't quite healing. It's just making, you know, its hit points bigger. But it kind of functions like a healing mechanic. And so slowly but steadily, these Rhinos are getting above 100k hit points. And that is another really, really successful round, sending napping now down to 651 hit points. But here comes round number 9 with unit reinforcements. Now, I wasn't particularly looking for anything. I could have gone for Overlord. In fact, I probably should have to grab some Photon, because I'm currently not running Photon coating on my Rhino. Instead, I decided to go for the Saber because I was like, well, I'm not sure if these Rhinos are going to get in another time, so maybe it's good to have the Sabertooth there, you know, as a damage dealer, and that's what I went for. Instead, I go for Photon Coating on Farseers that I buy, just to add more tankiness, for 1, and 2, to try and avoid, you know, some of this acid as much as I can. Now, I didn't really want to walk into this section of the map because I thought it would reinforce it. So instead, I move my Sabertooth into the corner here, and I can also move one of my Rhinos to that corner as well and start running in to hopefully get another debuff. I'm also utilizing oil here because I didn't think he would shield. There are no spells available except tower oil, but oftentimes people, if they're in a bit of a pinch, won't be spending the resources on things like shields if no spells were offered directly on the round. And so this way I should be able to get rid of all of the chaff and hopefully allow my left side to do well. Opponent goes for elite recruited fortresses, grand total of 3 of them, very expensive round, and also keeps the Sabertooth on the field. So suddenly there's 6 fortresses to deal with. I do have a Rhino all the way in the back here, which managed to pick up a level, so that will slowly start accumulating a lot of hit points and a lot of bonus attack, and hopefully I can somehow time a debuff here if I manage to get through, and then start chopping on that right side. Here we go. So bundled together units, the Sabertooth. It is looking at my Rhino, but we managed to chop down a level 1 fortress, and this diagonal was not covered by my opponent. Fortress is trying to do its very best. It will take down one of my rhinos, but the other one manages to get to the tower and get a debuff. Very timely, because that rhino arrived just in time to start getting rid of a level 2 fort. And in the meantime, the wasps are doing a pretty good job, because they're still moving. You know, not all of them get taken out by the Fort AA, and we managed to get the win. Pretty epic stuff. I was quite happy with this one. Going for the new tech on the rhinos. It is not very often that you get to see rhinos do anything more than tank and actually fight back against, you know, stuff like level 2 fortresses with overload. But in this scenario, they did. So, yeah, you can see here, Fortress with 50,000 damage dealt, 150,000 on that one top on damage. This one, 133,000, taking down the high-level Fortress on the right side. And, yeah, just overall, a really cool game. Now, what should Napping have done? On round number 9, I believe Melting Point was offered as well. It was. Now, it feels bad to buy something like a Melter when you're Giant Spec, and the Sabertooth is worth more in terms of sell value if you would want to go for that, but I think you should have gone for Melting Point here, and yeah, just, you know, build the Melting Points. Don't trust the Fortresses, but it's a hard call to make, because honestly, you know, who would expect the Rhinos to beat these Overload Fortresses, especially once you buy 3 level 2 Fortresses? I don't think you're expecting to lose there. So I think I would do something like this with the Melting Points. Perhaps add one over here. And then go temp range. I probably should sell this Phoenix. I don't think it's the most useful. And then perhaps we just go for some missiles on the towers. Trying to deal with that. I do have some money left. Wondering what I could use that for. I guess I could just buy another crawler all the way in the back. Hopefully it arrives at a fortunate timing, and perhaps it can distract some of the rhinos from getting to tower. So maybe level that tower as well. And yeah, I mean, at that point, I guess we have a level here on the Wraith if we want to. And we can put down another missile just in case there's more missile interceptors to really guarantee that anything moving in gets slowed down. Let's have a look. Can the Melting Point lock on? It will, onto that first one, so that should be dead. The one in the middle bites the dust very rapidly. Now my Fortress goes down, but so goes the second Rhino. And with the second Rhino being dead, that does mean that there's no immediate tower debuff. Left side also, that Rhino falling. And my Melting Point managing to take down all of the remaining forces, and that actually would have been enough for lethal. So a different choice of unit there in the unit reinforcement pack would have led to a victory, but it's a tough call to make. Again, you know, Giant Spec, you don't necessarily want to go for Melter, and I don't think you can realistically expect triple Blue Fortress with those techs to not get things done. I guess also positioning something on the outside here would have been enough. Perhaps going for Fortresses but stacking them on the right side and going for a bit of a gamble would have been enough. I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. But yeah, you know, that's the nature sometimes of aggro gameplay, trying to keep your opponent guessing and yeah, going for those 50-50s when the early game doesn't quite go your way with, you know, the early acid pickup and just overall, yeah, some pretty poor rounds. Anyway, I hope that you liked this video. If you did, please leave a thumbs up. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about the, you know, the Land Cruiser tech and perhaps something like that combat evolvement on the Rhino. Have you used it? Have you had success with it? Let me know. If you want to stay up to date with my latest content, please consider subscribing. And if you want to see me play live, check me out on Twitch. With that being said, take care, guys, and see you in the next video. Bye-bye.